Britain just received a formal warning that its taps could soon run dry, not in a far-off, abstract future, but a near one. A 20 billion debt bomb is about to explode inside its largest water company, and if it fails, a country of 67 million people might just discover what it feels like to die of thirst. Right now, the United Kingdom is burning. In July of 2026, for the third time in 3 consecutive months, the nation recorded temperatures over 35 degrees Celsius. A thermometer in Wisley, Surrey, hit 35.5 on July 4th. A month before, on June 26th, a weather station in Lingwood, Norfolk, provisionally recorded 37.7 Celsius, the hottest June day in British history. And a month before that, on May 26th, the iconic Kew Gardens in London shattered its own May record, hitting 35.1 Celsius. May, June, July, 3 straight months breaking a heat threshold that, until recently, was an anomaly for the height of a British summer. This is not a heat wave. It's a recalibration of reality. The United Kingdom is a nation architecturally frozen in time. Its homes, its infrastructure, its entire psychology were built for a climate that no longer exists. Houses of brick and dense insulation, designed to trap warmth during damp, brutal winters, have now become lethally efficient ovens. Air conditioning is a rarity, seen as a luxury for a climate that was defined by its mildness. That mildness is gone. The country's greatest strength against the cold has become its most profound vulnerability to the heat, and that vulnerability is being measured in human lives. During the record-shattering summer of 2022, when a village in Lincolnshire named Coningsby hit 40.3 degrees Celsius, the highest temperature ever recorded in the UK, the UK Health Security Agency calculated that too. 985 people died from the heat. In a slightly cooler 2023, the number was 2,295. The data for 2025, released in April 2026, showed 1,504 heat-associated deaths. These are not statistics. They are body counts, tallied year after year. And the true number for the unprecedented heat of 2026 is still being calculated. The real killer isn't the blazing afternoon sun. It's the suffocating darkness of the night. Meteorologists call them tropical nights. Nights where the temperature refuses to fall below 20 degrees Celsius. For the human body, this is a profound stressor. The cardiovascular system relies on the cooler night to recover from the heat of the day. When that recovery is denied, night after night, the strain accumulates. The heart works harder and harder just to pump blood and cool the skin. For the elderly, for the vulnerable, for anyone with a pre-existing condition, the risk of heart attack or stroke multiplies exponentially. The deaths are quiet. They happen indoors. In stuffy bedrooms where the windows are open but the air outside is just as hot. A nation built to keep the cold out now finds itself trapped inside with a killer it cannot escape, a silent, accumulating pressure. And the pressure was about to get much worse. The heat was only half the story. On March 19th, 2019, inside a conference hall in London, a man named Sir James Bevan stepped up to a podium. As the then chief executive of the Environment Agency, his job was to manage the nation's environmental risks. He looked out at the audience and delivered a warning so stark, so terrifyingly simple, that it should have triggered a national emergency. He unveiled a graph. One line showed the projected demand for water in England. The other line showed the projected supply. The lines were converging. Fast, he told the audience that around 25 years from that day, those lines would cross. He gave that intersection point a name, the jaws of death, the exact moment when England would not have enough water to supply its needs. Not a shortage, not restrictions, an absolute deficit. The clock started ticking that day. His speech was a desperate attempt to sound an alarm that almost no one seemed to hear. That alarm is now screaming. In May of 2026, a House of Lords committee published a report that confirmed Sir James Bevan's worst fears, but on an accelerated timeline. The report declared that without urgent, radical intervention, England will face a daily water shortage of 5 billion liters by the year 2055. 5 billion liters. Every single day. To put that number in terms that mean something, it's enough water to fill Wembley Stadium to the brim. Evaporated, gone, a national stadium's worth of missing water every 24 hours. The report was a mathematical confirmation that the jaws of death were not just real. They were opening wider and faster than anyone had dared to admit. How is this possible? The United Kingdom is famous for its rain. A green, pleasant, and perpetually damp island. But that reputation is a dangerous illusion. The southeast of England, where the majority of the population lives and works, actually receives less rainfall per person than Morocco. It is one of the most water-stressed regions in Europe, a fact completely at odds with the national identity. And that scarce water is being squandered on an industrial scale. A staggering 1/3 of the UK's water supply is lost before it ever reaches a home. It leaks out of an ancient, crumbling network of underground pipes, some of them dating back to the Victorian era. It bleeds into the soil in a constant, invisible hemorrhage. While the government and water companies plead with the public to take shorter showers, the average person uses 140 liters a day. Billions of liters are disappearing from the system through sheer neglect. Meanwhile, the country hasn't built a new major reservoir in decades. Planning hurdles, local opposition, and a chronic lack of political will have left the nation utterly dependent on the rain that falls, with nowhere near enough capacity to store it for the summers that are growing longer, drier, and hotter. The system was built for a world of predictable rainfall and mild summers, a world that was already vanishing, a system primed for total failure. And the failure arrived exactly on schedule. The crisis began in East London. On July 8, 2026, as temperatures climbed into the mid-30s, the unthinkable happened. In 17 separate postcode areas, the taps ran dry. Britain's largest water provider, Thames Water, suffered a catastrophic infrastructural failure at the peak of a lethal heatwave, with the UK Health Security Agency issuing warnings for people to stay hydrated. Thousands of residents had no water. None. Imagine the terror. The dawning realization as you turn the tap and nothing comes out. Not a trickle, not a drip, just the hollow sound of an empty pipe. Now imagine that feeling spreading across a city, a region, a country. This wasn't a hypothetical future from a House of Lords report. This was the reality on the ground. Today, the infrastructure, strained by unprecedented demand from the heat, had simply broken. But this was not just an operational failure. It was a symptom of a much deeper disease. Thames Water, the company responsible for supplying water to 15 million people in London and the southeast, was collapsing. The company was drowning. Drowning in an almost incomprehensible mountain of debt, estimated somewhere between $17.6 billion and $20 billion. The vast, complex financial engineering that had propped up the privatized utility for decades was finally giving way. On the same day that its customers in East London were lining up for emergency bottled water, the company's executives were locked in crisis talks with creditors, begging for a $3.35 billion equity injection just to stay solvent. The government had already refused a bailout. The company was now teetering on the brink of being forced into temporary government administration, a special process reserved for failing critical infrastructure. Think about that. A private company, which for decades had paid out billions in dividends to shareholders while accumulating billions in debt and presiding over a network that loses a third of its product to leaks, was now failing at its one single job, keeping the water flowing. It was a company hollowing out from the inside. A perfect metaphor for the nation's entire water strategy. Not an act of God. A failure of management. A failure of regulation. A deliberate choice made over decades to prioritize financial extraction over infrastructural resilience. The heatwave didn't cause the Thames Water crisis. It just exposed it, ripped away the financial facade, and revealed the rotten pipes underneath. And as the company fought for its life in boardrooms, the real-world consequences were being felt in kitchens and bathrooms across London. The jaws of death were no longer a 25-year projection. For the residents of those 17 postcodes, they had arrived. The question was, what else was breaking just beneath the surface? The crisis on land was terrifying enough, but something else was happening offshore, in the waters surrounding the UK. Something that scientists were only just beginning to understand. The country wasn't just burning, it was boiling its own oceans. On July 8, 2026, the same day Thames Water's systems were failing, the Met Office issued an unprecedented alert, not for the land, but for the sea. Parts of the English Channel and the southern North Sea were entering an extreme marine heat wave. Sea surface temperatures were measured at 4 to 5 degrees Celsius above the long-term average. 4 to 5 degrees. In the stable, slow-to-change thermal mass of the ocean, that's not a variation. It's a fever. Dr. Zoe Jacobs, a marine scientist at the National Oceanography Center, warned that the ecological impacts could be catastrophic. What we are seeing now, she explained, is the kind of temperature we would expect at the peak of summer, at the end of August. To see it in early July was shocking. The marine ecosystems of the United Kingdom are built for cool, temperate waters. A sudden, prolonged spike of 4 degrees is like dropping a tropical ecosystem into the North Atlantic. It fundamentally changes everything. The building blocks of the marine food web, plankton, algae, seagrasses, are exquisitely sensitive to temperature. A marine heat wave like this can trigger mass die-offs, creating dead zones on the seafloor. Cold water species of fish and crustaceans, unable to adapt or migrate quickly enough, face suffocation as warmer water holds less dissolved oxygen. It's an ecological demolition event, happening in silence, just miles off the coast. This was not a natural cycle. It was not a fluke. Professor Friederike Otto, a climate scientist at Imperial College London, has made her career quantifying the human fingerprint on extreme weather. Her team at World Weather Attribution uses advanced models to determine how much more likely an event has been made by climate change. Speaking about the 2026 heat waves, her conclusion was blunt. The heat we are seeing, she stated, is only possible because of the 4 degrees Celsius of global warming that has already happened. Without the blanket of greenhouse gases wrapped around the planet, a heat wave that saw temperatures hit 35 degrees in May would be statistically impossible. Impossible, not improbable, not unlikely. Impossible, it is a word scientists rarely use. But the evidence was undeniable. The heat baking the land, the tropical nights killing people in their beds, the fever spiking in the oceans, it was all connected. It was all part of the same relentless man-made pressure. The UK was a nation staring into the face of a climate it had helped create, a climate it was completely unprepared for. It had built a society on the assumption of stability, and that stability was not just gone. It never was. The search for solutions has become desperate. The May 2026 House of Lords report, the one that quantified the 5 billion liter daily deficit, was not just a document of despair. It was a plea for action. It called for a complete revolution in how the country thinks about water. A massive push for rainwater harvesting, capturing the runoff from roofs and roads that currently overwhelms sewer systems and washes into the sea. An aggressive new target for domestic water use, demanding that per capita consumption be driven down from 140 liters a day to 100 or even 85. And it called for new reservoirs, huge national infrastructure projects to capture and store the water from the wetter winters to survive the drier summers. But here, the paradox deepens. For decades, plans for new reservoirs at sites like Abingdon in Oxfordshire have been blocked. Blocked by local opposition, by environmental assessments that stretch on for years, by a political system that rewards short-term thinking and shies away from long-term, multi-billion-pound investment. It is easier to tell people to take shorter showers than it is to build the infrastructure that would actually secure their water supply for the next 50 years. The problem runs deeper than politics. It is cultural. Water in the UK has always been treated as an infinite resource, something that falls from the sky, free and abundant. It's an assumption so deeply ingrained it's almost unconscious. Sir James Bevan, in that same 2019 speech, understood this. He knew that engineering and policy alone were not enough. He argued that for the UK to escape the jaws of death, a profound cultural shift was needed. Wasting water, he said, must become as socially unacceptable as blowing smoke in the face of a baby. That is the scale of the challenge, not just building new pipes, but rewiring the national psyche. And the time to do it is running out. Every new heat wave accelerates the crisis. Hotter temperatures mean more evaporation from reservoirs like Farmore in Oxfordshire, the levels of which are watched by water managers like doctors monitoring a failing patient. Hotter temperatures mean greater demand, as people use more water for drinking, for cooling, for everything. The twin crises of heat and drought are feeding each other, creating a vicious, accelerating cycle of risk. We are living in an age of consequences. The UK is discovering that a century of industrial emissions, decades of underinvestment in critical infrastructure, and a deep-seated cultural denial about the limits of its own environment have a price. That bill is now coming due. It's being paid by the elderly, dying in overheated homes. It's being paid by the residents of East London, queuing for bottled water. It's being paid by the marine life suffocating in a warm, acidic sea. The government convenes the National Drought Group. The Environment Agency issues warnings. The Met Office's Chief of Science, Professor Stephen Belcher, who oversaw the first ever red extreme heat warning in 2022, speaks of unprecedented conditions becoming the new norm. But the warnings have been sounding for years. Sir James Bevan delivered his prophecy in 2019. The Climate Change Committee has been publishing detailed reports on adaptation failures for more than a decade. The information was there. The data was clear. The models were pointing in one direction. Downward, the United Kingdom is a nation adrift, caught between the memory of a climate that made it and the reality of a climate that now threatens to break it. The heat, the thirst, the collapsing infrastructure, these are not separate problems. They are the symptoms of a single, systemic failure to prepare for a future that is already here. The jaws of death are no longer a distant threat on a chart in a conference hall. They are closing, right now, around a nation that still believes it can reign its way out of a drought. And the most terrifying part?